Hello, and thank you for joining us for an introduction to Convention of States. Who decides? That's the most important question we're asking tonight. I want to introduce two people, Chet Grant and Robert Shea Bonhag. There's Chet and
Hello,
Shea.
everyone.
They will
Hey
be
there.
your hosts tonight. I will be in the background. I would invite you to please send us your comments, send us your questions. Wherever you're watching in from, type them right into the chat box. We'll see them. I'll get them put on the screen. And when we've got questions, I'm going to turn it over to the guys. Like right now, this is it. This is your show. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Okay, Shea, maybe let's start off. What brought you into Convention of State? What attracted you to it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I've been involved with Convention of States about 4 years now. And someone invited me to a meeting, and I attended, and I thought, hey, this is a good idea. Washington is broken. We need to do something. And they started talking about the kind of positions you could do. And I thought, well, state writer, I could write. So why don't I do that as a volunteer? And so I've been doing that ever since. And it's been great fun in working with the team, getting Convention of States focused. And I've been writing a number of different topics. I particularly enjoy the federal fritters piece, which gets into how we miss spending our money in Washington. So I've been spending a lot of time on that, and but I really like where Convention of States is going, because truly Washington is broken. We got to do something.
Yeah, that's great, Shea. It's just, my story is similar. I got drawn to, I think, something I saw online, and I just, as I begin to see it repeatedly, I begin to think, this makes an awful lot of sense. I got myself to the point where I just couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. I felt like I needed to do something. So that kind of got me going and got me started. So, and I think, one of the things about what we do, especially with things the way they are today, I think we connect up and we link into at least the events and activities, a lot of them that are going on in Washington, D.C. today. Whether you agree with the methodology or not is beside the point, okay? Chet's perspective here is, we've been in this country since our framers created the Constitution. We've been going back and forth as a country on, how to go about this, how relevant is the Constitution. The progressive movement since its inception has been discounting the value of the Constitution almost from day one, and it has just accelerated with time up to the point where in the early 1900s, 1930, thereabouts, people like Woodrow Wilson and both of the Roosevelts and Dewey, as progressives, vigorously discounted the need and the value of the Constitution, thinking and believing, and all progressives believe this, believing that the whole is more important than the individual, okay? And so I'll say we've been under attack from almost day one, and it has just accelerated and ramped up. It's people who take an oath of office talk about protecting the Constitution against foreign enemies and domestic. Okay, so it's they say it differently, but that's the gist of what they do when they take office. Is they swear to protect the country and the Constitution internationally as well as domestically, and that's really important today. So what we'll do here is we'll go through and we'll talk about some of the drivers of the behind calling for a Convention of States. What's the need to do this? And as we do that, you have to sort out, symptoms from root causes, I like to say, okay? there's a lot of things going on in this country that are symptomatic of a system that's gone wrong. Okay. So we've got to be able to sort through the drivers. We'll certainly talk about the process, the Article 5 process and what it takes to make it happen. And then we'll finish up with what the audience and the members who are with us tonight, what is it that you can do, like Shea and I have done at the outset here. So anything else you want to add, Shea, before we get on with this?
No, it's really good. One of the other programs that we ran was the whole issue of the Constitution and what does it stand for. And I think the reality of reading the Constitution, and I encourage all the listeners to do that. It's pretty simple stuff, by the way, and it's pretty easy to read. But it really envisioned a limited government. It did not envision a monstrous government that we have today. And so if we think about what the founders really built, is they were trying to figure a way to have a limited national government with most of the decisions being made by the states or local entities. And we've drifted from that. And the Convention of States is really aimed at trying to get that back into some kind of balance.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. It's when I was working full time, I had the extraordinary opportunity to work with a man by the name of W. Edwards Deming, Dr. Deming.
Oh, did you really?
I did. I got to work with him personally. It was a real honor to work with the man. But one of the things he talked about was constancy of purpose.
Yes, okay? Right.
And so, to my way of thinking, we've lost some of that going forward from what our framers intended to what we have now. We've lost that constancy of purpose. It's been really diluted, almost. It's not been obliterated, but it's much, much less today than it was from what the framers intended for us to do.
So I'd like to talk, not now, but about what you've done with Dr. Deming. Because he and I did a project together as well. So it's really,
you did.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk offline.
Yeah, Mercy Hospital in Chicago. Unbelievable.
Okay.
Project.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get started here.
Yep.
So let's start off. What's behind? What's the problem? What's the driver that causes so many of us to want to pull off a convention of states? We're a nationwide project. There's 5 million of us in total around the nation. We're the largest grassroots organization in the country, as I understand it. We're nonpartisan. Shea and I have to behave very nonpartisan as we do this. We can't support Republicans or Democrats or individual politicians. We have to take this right down the middle. So as we do this and as we look at what's going on, we look at it from the point of view of the government as a whole, right? We don't pick on, we don't bother to worry about specific individuals or what they might do or what they might not do. You have to look at this, as Dr. Deming would say, frankly, you have to look at this as a system, a process, and you can do that. You can look at it in that way. And once you start to do that, I think you begin to understand what the real problem is. So, as you see here, there's 3 categories where things have kind of gone off the rails. The debt and the spending is out of control. The government is reaching into our personal lives way more than it's supposed to. And you've got people who are working in government way too long. When they start to do that, you get into all these sidebar issues of they've been there so long they retire as multimillionaires. That was never what our framers intended. So, any thoughts, Shea?
No, those are good. I mean, you could have a lot more topics to talk about, but the nice part about the Convention of States is that we've focused on those 3, and
right.
Every one of the 19 states that have agreed to the Convention of State principle have agreed to those same 3 tenets.
Right.
So, and every time we ask another state to vote yes for Convention of States to ask for a convention, we're asking for them to do the same 3 items. So let's have a convention that talks about some way to control debt, some way to maybe do term limits, or how do you stop the overreach of the federal government? It's always those three things that we're talking about. So it's really a beautiful grassroots effort.
Yep, it sure is. Okay, so if you begin to look at the financial side of things, very quickly, when you look at a chart like this, you can see that the spending is not specific to any one party or administration. You can maybe get away with the Nixon, Ford, and even Carter era as not contributing so much to the debt. But after that, it began to accelerate and go up. And it just, again, it doesn't matter, Republican or Democrat, this is a systemic problem. The government has just gone out of control. It doesn't know how to budget. It doesn't know how to stay within boundaries when it comes to finances and money. I was reading something the other day. When they set a budget, a federal budget, I'm used to, and you probably are too, Shea, you start with a zero-based budget, and then you build it from there, right? I'm sure you did that when you were working.
Yep, for sure.
Okay, so the federal government doesn't do that. The federal government takes the numbers as projected from last year, and that's where they start. And then they just add to it.
Yeah.
So pretty quick, you can begin to see why this chart is beginning to look as bad as it does.
Right, exactly.
So
and by the way, that chart should really reflect 36.22.
Yes.
Right.
Yep, it
trillion.
should. Yep, it's
because that's where we are today.
Yep, it's about 10 off. So you're right. It's not current. But again, the whole point here is
it keeps growing.
It keeps growing in spite of who's in the presidential office, right?
Well, and you can understand that. I mean,
Sure.
I'm in the Congress, and it's easier to just agree to spending more money in that particular area. Every bureaucracy comes in with wonderful programs. If we just had a few more dollars, we could do X, Y, and Z. And so, yes, we all agree and we spend all the money. But no one looks at the bottom line to the whole thing to say, hey, how are we paying for all this?
Yeah, right. I'm pretty comfortable saying that there's no accountability here.
Right, exactly.
They put these numbers together, and as we've over time, we've been able to see, and you've done it with your fritter stuff, right?
Right.
You've uncovered and exposed a number of very foolish ways we spend our money in the federal government.
Right. Yep.
All right. So if you begin to look at, and this is a disturbing chart for me. You look at the mandatory piece of this, and for folks who may not know or maybe don't want to read the words at the top, that mandatory spending are things like Medicare, Medicaid, defense. Those are fixed costs that we have to account for and cover as a part of the national budget, or whatever it is you want to call it. So 61% of it is fixed. You're going to pay that no matter what. So you've got to have enough revenue coming in to cover that portion of it. Okay, that's the mandatory spending is just under $3 trillion. So you've got to, at least to begin with, your starting point is you got to take in $3 trillion. Okay, just to do that. Well, now you add in the discretionary piece of it, and that's $1.5 trillion. And then the one that is of concern here is the interest on our debt, and it just baffles me no end. All they talk about is paying the interest. You don't hear any discussion like we would have to do paying on the principal.
Right.
Okay. All they do is they pay down the interest, and that's at 8%, and it's probably higher than that now. This is not.
Do you want to take a guess of what the actual out-of-pocket expense is and interest today?
Percent wise?
No, it's $952 billion.
Is it?
$952 billion.
All right. So
So
it's approaching $1 trillion on its own.
exactly. And
Yeah.
that's really scary because now where is that going to come from?
Well, and that's right. Then it's the age-old argument, taxes or no taxes, cut interest, cut this to, do it, grow the economy and bring in money that way. There's all kinds of arguments on how you generate more revenue. It's interesting to me, all through the prior administration, I'll say it, the Trump tax cuts were still in effect. And so through those tax cuts, we were able to bring in near record levels of revenue with that approach, but it still was not enough. They still spent more than they were taking in. And that's really what this boils down to, is the government does not know how to spend within its means. It does not know how to create a budget and stay within it. All right. This is another look at the financial side of spending and what's going on. There's been maybe two times in our history. The World War II was one where, the federal debt skyrocketed. This chart is a chart that shows the debt and its relative and how it's relative to what's called our gross domestic product. The gross domestic product is the value of all of the goods and services that this country produces. So you can see here, during World War II, we went into debt to the point where we were in debt, and it covered or exposed itself to where we were spending 100% of what our gross domestic product was capable of producing. But it came down, as you can see, that we worked at it as a government. So it's possible to do this, but it takes a great deal of courage and discipline to bring that down where it did around 1980. And then it began to climb up after that. The pandemic was a big shot, and it's projected by 2050 that we'll be in debt to the tune of 200% of all the goods and services this country produces. And that's just, you hear financial expert one after the other, they continue to say that's unsustainable.
All right.
And it truly is. You can't keep up this level of spending going forward like this, where it's going to cause more trouble. It's going to do all kinds of things to this country financially. The dollar value will be affected. The ability, our credit rating could be affected if we can't meet our payments. So again, it's you have to look at this certainly on a macro scale, but it doesn't paint a pretty picture here at all, does it, Shea?
No, interesting. After World War II, a number of the rules that were put in place, or the spending that was put in place for World War II, had sunsets on them, i.e. they had automatic declines or stopping points. Since the pandemic, we haven't done any of that.
Right.
All of it is just like you said, Chet, it's incremental. So we take whatever it was last year, we add to it more, and we add to it, and we add to it. And that's where this chart takes you.
Yep.
So we've, as convention states, let's assume we're at the dotted line, what we got to do is find a way to ratchet some of that spending back down again.
Yep.
Kind of the way we did after World War II.
Yep.
So we've got to sunset some costs.
That's a really great connection, Shea.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let me see if we can get this. This is going to show you the difference between what Congress actually passes in law and the president signs versus what the unelected bureaucracy puts out in the way of rules and regulations. So the first one will go pretty quick because it's not much, but the second one will take a little longer. So take a look at this. There's no sound here. When I first saw this, it just absolutely blew my mind. And this is over a given span of time. It's probably like a year, I suppose, is what it is. In a year's time, the unelected promote and put out this much in the way of paperwork for rules and regulations. It's just astounding to me that we've got this kind of thing going on. And again, it's an issue of, the unelected bureaucracy. They're not held accountable to this stuff.
Right. So that chart's a great one. I hadn't seen that before, but every year about 80,000 pages of new regulations are added, to the point where we have 190,000 pages in the Code of Federal Regulations. 50 chapters worth, 190,000 pages.
Yep.
Describing the rules and regulations that we have to follow.
Yep.
And each year you're adding a whole series of additional regulations and more paper, as Chet's diagram shows pretty clearly.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. The first bullet here, it says, the average American probably doesn't realize I don't think we know that it's 3 felonies per day, but we are all breaking the law to some extent every day because of all of the rules and regulations that have been produced and are buried deep in this book that you're talking about, Shea.
Yeah.
The original Constitution is what, 4,000 words, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you go from 4,000 words to thousands of pages
yeah. Nobody saw this coming.
No. Well, the framers certainly didn't see it. This is way beyond what they expected, what they wanted to have happen. And what it does is it just contributes to an out of control condition here. Again, this is all being done with very little oversight. The other problem we have in this country, in our federal government, is, we got a lot of people working in Washington, D.C. that are there far too long. I worked for 36 years in my job. I don't know how long you worked, Shea, but I
still working.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, for me, 36 years was too long, but different situation. I was ready to retire at the end of 36 years. You got some of these folks who are going much longer than that. The issue, the law, it's a fine balance between working too long and not there long enough, right?
Right. Exactly.
If you put people in office and they only work for 6 years, that's probably not going to be long enough. They're not able to learn the ropes, so to speak, in that amount of time. So when you start talking about, as we will, things like term limits, there's a balance there between what's enough and what's not enough. But the track record here is the longer they're there, the more they use our money to enrich themselves. Okay. So that's something that we need to address. And this is one of the things that an Article 5 Convention of States is intended to address. It's interesting, when you go around the country, term limits is pretty broadly accepted and approved of as a one way of addressing what's going on in Congress. There's a sheet that we had yesterday in Lansing. There's a whole host of Article 5 conventions that have been called for on different subjects, not nationwide like what we're doing, but the vast majority of those are conventions of states for term limits. We're not the only one working on term limits. We're the only one, though, working on the 3 items. But, people really are supportive of it to a high level, imposing term limits on our elected officials. And I think it doesn't stop there, right, Shea?
No, but we have some experience in Michigan with term limits.
Yep.
And in fact, we just had a constitutional amendment or some change in the way the term limits are defined in Michigan. But at least we know that the legislature is there for a specific purpose, and then they're supposed to get out. So we understand how that process can work. We have to make some adjustments to it. Fine. We can do that.
Yeah.
And we have. But that's really the whole idea.
Yep. Well, our framers, we aren't going to be able to function as they did. They were largely farmers and tradesmen, craftsmen types, but they expected to come in, serve their time, which was not long, and then go back to their job. So
Right.
yeah, we aren't living in that age anymore, but I don't think that they would be shocked today to see what some of these folks are doing. Okay. So as you begin to look at the bigger problem here, and that to me is the most logical way to do this. This is something that's more than a political party, more than a politician or office holder as individuals. This is about the system of government, okay? The system of government has just grown way beyond what is necessary for the good of the country. We've got the three branches, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Two of them for sure have grown way bigger than they should. If you look at the executive branch alone, and it depends on how you count heads, but there's at least 4 million people, and by some counts, when you start bringing in the NGOs and the contractors, the executive branch hires about 10 million people. That alone should tell you something about the growth of government and what it can do. I don't know about where you work, but the company I worked for was a large company, and it was not too hard to be able to see the waste that went on. I don't say there was fraud where I worked, but there was a lot of waste and inefficiency just because it was so big.
Yep.
There's just no way, from the top guy to the bottom gal, that you can be efficient in workflow and getting work activities and things done, spending money wisely. It's just the bigger the organization, the more chance there is for waste and inefficiency. By comparison, the legislative and judicial branches, they're just a little over 30,000 people. Those haven't changed a lot, as compared to what the executive branch has grown into being. But I think today, I'm pretty sure this is right, but the United States government is the largest employer in this country, if not in the world.
Pretty upsetting, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, it's just, you don't have to even worry about digging in to find fraud and abuse. It's just the inefficiencies that come with something so large. And Dr. Deming would have, I'm sure, a lot to say about something like this. That's just, it's grown way beyond its ability to function, truthfully. Yep. All right. So as we move forward, we've kind of highlighted some things here relative to money and term limits and growth of government. So we're going to take now a closer look at, who's really in control of this entity, this monstrosity called the federal government. And as you do that, as we do it, we'll bring in here both some domestic issues and equally as important, some international and foreign issues that end up being drivers for why we need a convention of states. So people talk about the swamp, the administrative state, right, Shea?
Yeah.
And
right.
I'm not sure people always know just exactly what that means, right? But the slide previous to this just kind of detailed some of that out. But the question is, well, how did it get to be so big? It's just, what was the drivers that allowed the government to grow from where it was at its inception to where it is today? And it's things like, I don't know if the this Filburn Supreme Court decision or not, Shea, but it's one of several where the federal government, using the judicial branch, ruled against, in this case, a farmer who was trying to grow wheat to sell on the open market and wheat to feed his animals with.
Right.
And the federal government came after him and fined him for producing excess wheat that he was using to feed his animals. He took it to court and he lost, because the argument was that if he hadn't used that wheat to feed his animals, he would have had to buy it on the open market to feed his animals, thus affecting the commerce part of this thing. I mean,
Right.
that's astounding, but it's things like that that have enabled, the federal government to grow like it has. I mean, this is just one example of many, but it's these kinds of decisions over time that have enabled, I think, through the exercising of the Commerce Clause, which is one of the original, I think it's the framers listed, I think it's 11 things that the federal government was supposed to do, one of which was to regulate commerce between the states, right?
Yep.
So here they go. They're regulating commerce between the states, and they're regulating it such that the individual gets fined.
Yeah.
For trying to do what he does for a living.
Right.
Okay?
So another way to look at this, and you've worked in large organizations as I have. Have you ever been in an organization that didn't want to add another person for some special little project or some little special thing that they wanted to do that they thought was really good?
Yep.
And every single organization I've worked in has had multiples of those. And in fact, the way the person stays in power is to continually add people within their organization to take on these special projects, which is really neat. So they're all those people in the bureaucracy are thinking this is a good thing to do. This is a big thing. This is going to help a lot of people.
Right.
And I'm just going to add another person. I'm going to add this program. I'm going to do the next thing. So they're all thinking about how to make things better or how to do more. And that's the logic that everybody's got. Nobody's going into the federal government saying, oh, I'm going to make this a powerhouse. No, they go in, they say, I want to make this the best X department in the world. So
Right.
I'm going to add more people. I'm going to do more things. And they then one program leads to 3 other programs that then lead to additional things, all of which, when you look down the road, you look at it and say, that's not what we wanted.
Right.
That wasn't our
Yep.
plan, but we ended up getting there through allowing this just migration to go on unchecked.
Yep. I started, interestingly, as a kind of a side, but connected, I started to read Project 2025.
Yeah.
It's like 900 pages.
Oh my.
I didn't get through to the end, but in the early chapters, as I read this, what they simply detailed out the existing structure in the executive office. This is just the president's office. And, they start detailing out all these staff and sub-staff and offices and sub-offices and, assistant that and temporary that. I mean, the executive office is by itself a huge organization.
Right.
So, it goes on from there, as you just pointed out, well, we'll hire someone to do this. And then they never let them go. I've had the opportunity in my career to go to Washington, D.C., to testify before congressional committees on technical stuff. And in meetings, it became very clear to me that there are an awful lot of arrogant people in the federal government because they automatically assume they know more than we do. And I'm talking about technical stuff. These
Right.
guys come in and they say, well, appoint me to this. And one guy come in and he wanted us to appoint him as chairman of our board of directors. That's how arrogant he was. So it's just astounding to me, the attitude that some of these folks have. And it really ties into what you said a moment ago, Shea. All right. Continuing on as to who we think is running the store here. And this is where we begin to get into more than just the domestic perspectives on what's influencing our federal government and the things that go on in this country. And it's just, you got all kinds of organizations around the world, as you can see. And this is not even a complete list, but it's, I'm going to come to a chart here in a minute, but you got a whole bunch of unelected elites with all kinds of money that are coming together here to tell the rest of us how we're going to live. Okay. And it's just, and the thing to pay attention to here is nobody elected these people to these jobs, this World Economic Forum. Those are not elected people. They're just people with a lot of money and too much time on their hands. But as you go down the list, this is not a party or a party limited organization. I mean, there's Republicans, there's Democrats, there's socialists, there's all kinds of folks who are part of this elitist organization. And this next chart, I think, one more. Within this global elite structure, and even here in this country, you've got all of these particular theories and practices of governance and regulating communities and countries. All of these are here and at work in this country, whether you know it or not. Everything here is active. It's certainly active around the globe. It is, you've certainly got people who ascribe to these philosophies as a part of this global elite organization. Okay. The one at the bottom, capitalism, is the one that should be in prominence and should be in favor. And it really is the one that keeps us economically viable. It keeps us growing, keeps us advancing. These other 5 do none of that. The power is concentrated in anywhere from 1 as a tyrannical ruler to a committee of a few, as in communists, that are going to dictate and control what we have or what we don't have. But all of this, it's pervasive through this country. It is pervasive through our educational system. It's just everywhere. And we need to wake up to that fact that, it's going to take not much. If we don't wake up, we're going to go from what the progressives started in the early 1900s with some aggression, and it's going to morph into communism. And as Nikita Khrushchev said years and years ago, your children will work under communism and we won't have to fire a shot. I don't know if you remember hearing that, Shea, or if you're old enough to even have heard it. But
yeah, I don't remember that one.
Well, I do. I remember him. He was standing at a podium at the UN. He had a shoe in his hand. He was pounding on the podium and ranting. And this was his perspective. We'll take you over and we'll never have to fire a shot. Huh. And the frightening thing is, you can see it happening today. Yeah. I think Europe is farther down this road than we are.
I think that's true.
But we've gone way too far down this path as it is. And so it's important that we stand up and do something to push back on all this. And this has been going on for decades. This is not something that's going to be solved by one administration, one individual in a very short amount of time. This is going to take a continual and constant effort of education and re-education for some folks to understand what's going on.
But again, if we can get the term limits in place and we can stop the overreach of the federal government, we can get the budget under control, some of that will happen maybe easier. And that's the reason a convention of states is so important here.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay. This is the chart that I referred to earlier. It's an org chart of sorts. I got this. My wife
looks like an eye chart to me.
Well, it's tough. You can't. I'm not going to expect anybody to read all of this. I'll kind of summarize it here.
Yeah.
But my wife found it for me, and I forget the author's name, but there was a guy who took the time to structure all of these committees and organizations, and from a process perspective, how it was to flow. And so you got policymakers who are at the top. These are the global elites, the people with the money, the bankers, the World Economic Forum, the rich, old and rich families. They are the ones who are trying to set policy globally. Okay. And so once they create and set the policy, I mean, you got think tanks everywhere who are working on this stuff. Big central banks are working on it. They're working at trying to set up a currency flow or manage the currency globally. You hear all about digital currencies and stuff. Well, that's all about control. All of the policy then gets distributed by various entities around the world, the WHO, the World Bank, different philanthropic organizations. George Soros comes to mind. He's part of the policy distributors. Okay. He's a part of getting things distributed around the country and through the around the world and through our country. And then when it comes to enforcement, and they take and they use local country agencies to now try and enforce all of this stuff, whether they be science-based, legally based. They use local entities to enforce the policies that are being distributed. And then, so of course, they've got to market all of this stuff. So they use all kinds of platforms to do that. Social media is only one, but they are aggressively using all of these, I'll say, so-called advertising agencies to get the word out and do it in a repetitious manner, so that pretty soon people believe it. They hear it often enough and over enough. They just believe it's true, and they don't bother to check into what's behind all of this.
Yep.
Okay. And of course, at the very bottom, the people who've got to carry the load is us.
Yeah, here we are.
This all rolls downhill to us. And this is actually in place. It is actually happening. Okay. And there's another video coming up that is even more frightening than what this chart should make you feel. In fact, it's this one. I'm going to try and play this. I see Rick Bell's online. Rick, let me know if you can see and hear this, okay?
Nations, gods, money, corporations, states, the only place they exist is in the stories that we invent and tell, as they are not physical or biological realities. But once you have a technology to change humans, it will, I would say, downgrade them and not upgrade them. It will make them more efficient soldiers or employees or whatever, but it will make them kind of poorer beings, lesser beings. Now humans are developing even bigger powers than ever before. We are really acquiring divine powers of creation and destruction. We are really upgrading humans into gods. And COVID is critical because this is what convinces people to accept, to legitimize total biometric surveillance. We want to stop this epidemic. We need not just to monitor people, we need to monitor what's happening under their skin. Human can also say, look, there's a God above the clouds. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, God will punish you. And if you believe this fictional story, then you will do what you are told to do. You don't have any answer in the Bible what to do when humans are no longer useful to the economy. You need completely new ideologies, completely new religions, and they are likely to emerge from Silicon Valley or from Bangalore and not from the Middle East. And they are likely to give people visions based on technology. Everything that the old religions promised, happiness and justice and even eternal life, but here on earth with the help of technology and not after death. We now see mass surveillance systems established even in democratic countries, which previously rejected them. And we also see a change in the nature of surveillance. Previously, surveillance was mainly above the skin. Now it's going under the skin. Governments want to know not just where we go or who we meet. Above all, they want to know what is happening under our skin. What's our body temperature? What's our blood pressure? What is our medical condition? This is, of course, necessary to deal with the epidemic.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
You know, we are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people dying, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is the time when things are shifting. There's gonna be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it.
If that doesn't scare you, you're not listening.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you've got people here who don't believe in God, who are going to control us through technology, pulling an organization together that we're all going to be governed under. Our Constitution will be gone. Forget it. All right, we'll move on. We'll try to get through here in the time we've got left, you know, what Article 5 is, what it does, and what you can do. So I don't know about you, Shea, but when I read this, there was one word, and I give it away here, but there was one word that stood out to me when I read this paragraph, you know?
Right. Yeah, the or statement.
It just jumped out at me when I read this, because
In fact, that the state, it gives the option of the state to do something, which is that's really neat.
Yes, it is. It is, you know, and I don't know that I'll show the next video, but I'll just talk about it. But, you know, Colonel Mason, right as they were concluding the Constitutional Convention, the last day, you know, stood up and he recognized that, you know, we've created this thing called the central government, but we've given the people no recourse if it should get out of control.
Right.
So he created this paragraph, and he put the word or in there, giving we the people the opportunity through a convention of states, an Article 5 convention of states, gave us the right to call a convention working with our state legislators to address what is for sure today an out of control condition in our federal government.
Yep.
So that's
pretty insightful if you think about it.
Yes,
you know,
it is.
that he would think about that and convince the other group and founding fathers that this was necessary.
Yep. Yeah. This happened after weeks of a lot of back and forth and contentious debate and discussion and at the last minute, and it was approved unanimously by those in attendance.
Yep.
They felt it important enough to give we the people the right to be able to counter what our federal government could possibly end up doing. So as you say, it was pretty insightful.
Right.
I'm not going to run this video because it just talks to what we just discussed.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit.
The good news is that 19 states have agreed to have a convention of states.
Yes.
And again, the three items are identified, and it's really clear what we want that convention of states to be. But Article 5 is really clear. It says if we have 34 states asking for a convention, we need to have it. And then we have that open discussion on those 3 topics and only those topics. And thank heavens that George Mason, and then backed up by James Madison and others, all agreed to this, because it's a golden opportunity, and I don't think it's ever been exercised. But it's an opportunity for us now.
Yeah,
because
there's been plenty of Article 5 conventions, smaller in scope, fewer states, but it's never been done in all 50 states.
Yeah. Well, the importance right now is that, you know, if we agree, I think collectively that Washington is broken, and that they're not going to fix it no matter who's in power. It's not going to get fixed on a long-term basis. So the only long-term basis we can move to is changing the U.S. Constitution so that we have term limits, something about the budget, whether it's fixed or whatever, and something about the overreach of government. And we should address those three topics. And again, 38 states have to agree to it. So it's it's impossible to be some crazy thing.
Well, it's difficult. I mean, we've got 18 more states who are in progress. The only thing I would maybe say differently, Shea, is, we're not changing one word in the Constitution. We are going to, as you said, we're going to amend the Constitution as we have done 27 times already.
Yep.
Okay, so what is Convention of States? We have a mission to build an engaged army of self-governing grassroots activists to inspire a political and spiritual awakening in America. Because this is, when you go back and you read the Declaration of Independence, especially, it was rooted in God and the belief in God and things like God-given natural rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The government does not bestow that on us. God does, okay? We are a 501c4, C3 organization, nonprofit. That's what causes us to behave as a non-partisan group. The whole thing is based on that paragraph, Article 5 in the Constitution. So as Shea just said, Washington, D.C. is not going to fix itself. All of the things that go on today in government and went on in the past can be undone. They don't make it permanent. This makes it permanent. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Michigan. We're getting close to the end of our time here. We've got a structure in Michigan, as all states do, with various leadership positions, volunteer positions. We've got a tremendous educational program where we train ourselves in Article 5 and elements of the Constitution. We train ourselves how to deal with people who oppose us, because they do. Usually they're misinformed or deliberately putting out disinformation that is not true. So we've got a really good training system that prepares us to take this forward as grassroots volunteers and engage with our friends, our neighbors, our families, and try and tell this story. I'm going to go to the next slide. Several years ago, our incoming state director, Sarah Santana, had a bunch of us sit down as leaders, and we divvied up the state into what we have as 15 regions. That's the color coding that you see on the mitten part of the map here. So over each of those, the intent is to have a regional director. We're a long ways from that today. We need help. We have 110 House districts in the state. We would like to have, 110 district captains in the state. We're a long ways from that. So we need help. We need to grow the organization. We need to grow and leverage our message through the growth of the organization and our volunteers. So that's been in place for quite a while. As you go through the Article 5 process, it's, we have to work with our legislators in Lansing. They are the ones that actually have to make it happen. We work on them through the grassroots effort with information and education from our volunteers and our citizens. They call, they contact, they meet with their legislators. We do it all the time, trying to bring the legislators on board, because they're key in this whole process. They're the ones that have to support this. We have to have legislative sponsors to get it introduced. They've got to vote on it. We've got to get 34 states to pass the resolution. And I think you said earlier, the resolution is the same in all 50 states, right, Shea?
It is. Yep.
And it's the same subject in all 50 states contained within that resolution. Okay. So I think this is just a graphic. It's the same thing. It's a graphic of how the process goes. The people lead, state legislators act, convention is called, amendments are proposed, then amendments are ratified, and then at the end, step 6, the Constitution is amended, as we have done 27 times. There's nothing new here once you get to the ratification procedure. And I think if you want to talk to it some more, Shea, the ratification process is a very high bar.
It is. Yeah, we're talking about 38 states have to agree to something in order to be ratified. So we're not going to get any crazy stuff happening because it just won't pass 38 states if it is.
No, that's right. It only takes one house there's 13 states that could stop this.
Yeah.
And that's all it would take. So it's a very difficult process to go through. You know, there's another slide coming up here. I'll talk specifically about in the red, you know, the creation of our 34 ready commissioner selection resolution.
Yeah.
That has been created. It's being created nationally to put some teeth in to the way our delegates are chosen and how they behave once they go to the convention. There's all kinds of stuff out there that talks to, oh, it's going to get out of control. They're going to go off track. They're going to propose things that, you know, will ruin the Constitution. Well, this 34 Ready is a document that has direct information on how they're chosen, what the job description is, what they can and can't do, and it has a penalty phase connected to it such that if these commissioners don't act as they're instructed by their home legislators, they can be subject to criminal penalty.
Yeah,
So
my own legislator was pleased to understand this because these are the concerns that she had going forward with the convention or the request for the convention. She wanted to make sure that we had commissioner selection clear and that they would stay on topic.
Yep.
So this is kind of getting everything ready for the 34.
So we'll end with this. What can you do? You know, we need to keep building our army. We need volunteers. We need leaders in all 15 regions and the 110 House districts. These are the kinds of jobs you can sign up for. It's all on our website, you know, which has been showing on the screen here as a trailer. So,
and you know, I signed up as a volunteer to give a couple of hours a week. That was it. And you know, that's been good for me, and it's worked out with my schedule. And that's all we're asking folks to do. We're not asking you to commit full time. We're just saying, give us some hours and let's work together to get this to happen.
Yes. Give us what you can afford to give us, but give us something. That's all we need you to do. So with that, I think we can end this.
Well, I've got a couple of requests here. Great job, guys. Thank you for doing this. We would ask, if you haven't already signed the petition, to please pull out your phone and get your QR code reader and sign the petition. When you do, your legislator will get a notification that you support Convention of States. And if you would like to volunteer, we can make it real easy. Here's another QR code. Fill this out. You'll get a phone call, might even be Chet. And we can talk to you about the roles and find something that fits you, your personality, your time, your commitment, and what you are able to do. Any last words, Chet or Shea?
Well, I got into this because I was tired of sitting on the sidelines. And I tell people, you know, when they ask me why I'm doing it for our son. You know, I cannot leave him with the kind of mess we have in our federal government today. It's just, it isn't off the rails, but it's pretty close. It's teetering on one side of the train tracks. And I can't sit back and just watch anymore.
Yeah.
We appreciate you,
point.
Chet.
Yep. Good point. Thank you.
Any words, Shea?
No, it's I think I've already said it, you know. I'm like Chet. I don't know what to do to help, but I know I can do this. So, you know, that's why I signed on, and I can give some time and actually see something happen. And that's what this is all about.
We are seeing things happen. I want to thank you both. I'm here because a few years ago, I went to a presentation that Chet did after seeing something on social media, and I've always been a voter and interested in politics and what's going on, but I felt frustrated that my vote just didn't matter anymore. And this was my way to help make my world better, our world better for my kids and the grandchildren yet to come. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm going to put this petition back up on the screen. If you have questions, please reach out to us through Facebook, through our website. We give you all kinds of places, and we will respond to your questions and inquiries. Thank you, guys. Thank you, audience. Until next time.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Shea.
Yeah, thanks so much.